Welcome to our deep dive,
Yeah.
into one of the most, I think, just profound explorations of suffering ever written, the Book
Yeah.
of Job,
Yeah.
and we're focusing on chapters 19 through 21, where things get
Really intense.
really intense as Job grapples with just unimaginable loss,
Yeah.
and his friends offer explanations that, well, don't exactly hit the mark.
It's fascinating because, we're not dealing with abstract philosophical concepts here.
Right.
Job's pain is raw,
Yeah.
visceral, and he does not hold back in expressing it.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Chapter 19 is like listening to someone's soul being ripped apart.
Right.
He talks about his honor being stripped away, his hope uprooted like a tree.
Wow.
He even says his own breath is offensive to his wife. It's almost hard to stomach
Yeah.
how complete his devastation is.
What strikes me is that his words aren't meant to be taken literally.
Right.
It's hyperbole, a literary device used to magnify the emotional truth of his experience.
Yeah.
Imagine feeling so utterly abandoned, so physically and emotionally broken. Yeah.
That even your own breath feels like a burden.
It makes you wonder what kind of suffering could push someone to that point.
Right.
And what's interesting is that even in this pit of despair,
Yeah.
a glimmer of hope kind of emerges.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, Job declares, "I know that my Redeemer lives."
That's right.
Yeah.
Job 19.2527
Yeah.
is a pivotal moment in the text.
Yeah.
Suddenly, amidst this torrent of pain, Job expresses a belief in a future vindication.
Yeah.
It's almost a foreshadowing of later theological concepts like resurrection and divine justice.
Do you think this means Job is clinging to some kind of delusion to cope with his suffering? Or is it a deeper, more fundamental aspect of his faith? What do you make of this sudden shift, listener?
It certainly complicates our understanding of Job's character.
Yeah.
He's not a passive victim wallowing in despair.
Right.
There's a resilience,
Yeah.
a refusal to let go of some kind of hope, even when everything around him
Yeah.
seems to justify his utter hopelessness. That's a good point.
Yeah.
He's clearly wrestling with some really complex emotions here.
Yeah.
But just as we start to see a crack of light in Job's darkness, his friend Zophar steps in with a completely different take in chapter 20.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Zophar represents a perspective that's sadly all too common.
right,
He's convinced that Job's suffering must be a punishment for some hidden sin.
right.
And he goes to great lengths to convince Job of this universal truth about how the wicked will ultimately get what they deserve.
Yeah, and he paints a pretty vivid picture of their downfall, doesn't he? He talks about them perishing like refuse being chased away like a vision of the night, their wealth vanishing like a dream. It's almost cinematic.
You can practically hear the dramatic music swelling as Zophar delivers his pronouncements. But seriously,
Yeah.
this urge to see wrongdoers punished
Hmm.
is a very human impulse.
Yeah.
Think about how satisfying it is to see a villain get their comeuppance in a movie or a book.
It's true. There's a certain sense of justice in seeing bad things happen to bad people. It makes us feel like the world is in order, that there's some kind of balance to things. But isn't there also a danger in that kind of thinking? I mean, are we so quick to assume that everyone who suffers somehow deserves it?
That's a crucial question,
Yeah.
and it gets to the heart of what Job will challenge in the next chapter. But before we get there, think about how Zophar's words might land on you if you were Job. Would they offer comfort, or would they feel like salt in a wound?
Zophar's pronouncements about the fate of the wicked almost feel like an attempt to impose order on a chaotic world,
Yeah.
as if by outlining the consequences of sin, we can somehow control
Right.
what happens to us.
Mm-hmm.
But as we move into chapter 21, Job throws a major wrench into that whole system of thinking.
He doesn't just passively disagree with Zophar.
Right.
He dismantles his argument piece by piece,
Oh, yeah.
using real-world observations rather than abstract theological concepts. It's as if Job is saying, "Open your eyes, Zophar. Look at how the world actually works."
And it's not just a matter of him defending his own innocence anymore.
Right.
He points to numerous examples of wicked people
Yeah.
living comfortable lives surrounded by their families,
Uh-huh.
dying peacefully in their old age.
Right.
He even describes their sides filled with fat and the marrow of their bones wet.
Oh, wow.
Hardly the picture of divine retribution.
That's right. It's a vivid and somewhat unsettling image.
Yeah.
Job is confronting Zophar with the undeniable reality that sometimes bad people do prosper while the innocent suffer. And this isn't just some philosophical musing. It cuts to the core of how we understand God's justice or lack thereof.
I imagine it would be pretty hard to hear those words if you were in Zophar's sandals, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like Job is saying, Your neat little explanation of suffering doesn't hold up in the face of lived experience.
Exactly. And it's a challenge that still resonates with us today.
Right.
How do we reconcile our belief in a just God with the seeming randomness of suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do the wicked seem to get away with their crimes?
It feels like Job's observations could easily lead someone into a crisis of faith.
Yeah,
If there's no guarantee of cosmic payback, what's to stop people from doing whatever they want?
right.
Does it mean there are no consequences for our actions?
That's one way to look at it. But perhaps Job is pointing toward a more nuanced understanding of God's justice, one that transcends our limited human perspective.
So instead of focusing on a transactional system of reward and punishment, maybe it's about something deeper. Maybe it's about developing a relationship with God that's based on trust, love, and understanding rather than fear of retribution.
That's an interesting perspective. It certainly complicates things,
Yeah.
but it also opens up the possibility for a more mature and meaningful faith. A faith that can sustain us even in the face of seemingly inexplicable suffering.
It makes me think about how Job's friends, with their rigid adherence to traditional beliefs, actually seem to miss the mark entirely. They're so focused on fitting his experience into their theological boxes that they fail to offer him any real comfort or understanding.
Their certainty becomes a barrier to empathy.
Yeah. They're more concerned with being right than with truly connecting with Job in his pain.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they push him further away rather than drawing him closer.
That's a pretty ironic twist, isn't it? The ones who claim to have all the answers end up being the furthest from the truth.
Right.
While Job, in his wrestling and questioning, seems to be moving toward a deeper, more authentic understanding of God.
It highlights the danger of clinging to simplistic explanations, especially when it comes to matters of faith and suffering. The book of Job invites us to embrace the complexity, the mystery, the questions that don't have easy answers.
And perhaps in that wrestling, in that willingness to sit with discomfort and uncertainty, we find a truth that's more profound and enduring than any pat answer.
That's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
And it leads us to a crucial turning point in the dialogue. In chapter 21, Job doesn't just point out the flaws in his friend's logic.
Right.
He goes on to challenge the very notion that God keeps track of human actions in this meticulous scorekeeping kind of way. He poses a question that's almost blasphemous in the context of his time. Can anyone teach God knowledge in that he judges those on high? It's as if he's suggesting that God operates on a different level entirely, a level that transcends our human ideas of reward and punishment.
It's a daring move, and it sets the stage for even more radical pronouncements in the chapters that follow. Job is pushing the boundaries of acceptable discourse,
Right.
forcing his friends and us to confront the limits of our own understanding.
That question about can anyone teach God knowledge, really throws a wrench into the whole debate, doesn't it? It's like he's saying that maybe our attempts to understand God's justice are like fundamentally flawed, that maybe we're trying to fit the divine into like a
Right, human-sized.
human-sized box. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's a radical notion,
it is.
and one that his friends are clearly uncomfortable with. But Job is relentless. He continues to dismantle their arguments, pointing out the inconsistencies between their beliefs and the realities of the world around them. He even accuses them of offering empty comfort and clinging to falsehoods.
It's interesting how Job's tone has shifted throughout these chapters. He started out in utter despair, then there was that glimmer of hope, and now he's almost defiant. It's like he's finding his voice in the midst of his suffering.
I think that's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
Job's journey isn't just about grappling with pain and loss. It's also about finding his own truth in the face of those who would silence or dismiss him. He's refusing to be pacified by easy answers or platitudes. He's demanding a deeper understanding, even if it means challenging the very foundations of his faith.
And in that sense, he becomes a model for all of us who struggle with, doubt, disillusionment, or the feeling that our experiences don't align with the neat and tidy explanations we've been given. Job teaches us that it's okay to ask hard questions, to wrestle with uncertainty, to demand more from our faith than just blind acceptance.
Absolutely. The book of Job doesn't shy away from the messiness of human experience. It doesn't offer a simple resolution or a pat answer to the problem of suffering. Instead, it invites us to sit with the discomfort, to lean into the mystery, and to find meaning in the midst of chaos.
So if we're not supposed to walk away from the book of Job with like a clear-cut answer about why people suffer,
Right.
what are we supposed to take from it? What does it offer us as modern readers grappling with our own questions about faith, justice, and the meaning of life?
I think it offers us a few crucial things. First, it validates the complexity of human experience. It acknowledges that suffering is real, that it can be random and unjust, and that it's okay to wrestle with those realities. Second, it challenges us to question easy answers and to search for a deeper understanding of God that goes beyond simplistic notions of reward and punishment. And finally, it encourages us to find our own voice, to speak our truth, and to refuse to be silenced by those who would tell us to simply accept things as they are.
It sounds like the book of Job isn't so much about finding answers as it is about learning to ask better questions. Questions that can lead us to a more authentic and resilient faith, one that can sustain us through the inevitable storms of life.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And perhaps in the end, that's the greatest gift the book of Job has to offer. A reminder that the journey of faith is not about arriving at a destination, but about embracing the messy, beautiful, and often challenging process of seeking truth. It's about learning to walk with uncertainty, to find hope in the midst of despair, and to hold on to the belief that even in the darkest of nights, a glimmer of light remains.
Job, Zophar, and the other friends all observe different patterns in the relationship between sin, suffering, and divine justice.
Yeah.
Each of them brought their own experiences and interpretations to the table, and ultimately none of them had all the answers. Now we turn to you, listener. What patterns have you observed in your own life? How do you make sense of the suffering you've witnessed or experienced? What questions are you still wrestling with? The book of Job invites us to continue the conversation, to keep searching, and to never stop seeking truth, even when it's elusive.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.